and today I'm going to be reading to you two creepypastas today. The creepypastas I'm going to be reading to you is Spongebob suicide and Squidward suicide. Two Nickelodeon lost episode creepypastas. So before I'm going to go into it, I am going to have to put a disclaimer that the following content is very disturbing and might be triggering for those of you who are not in the best place right now. And if you are one of those people who is easily disturbed by disturbing content like gore or just talking about very sensitive subject matters like suicide and murder, I would highly suggest you click off, and I will put in the description down below some resources that might be able to help you if you are feeling down, because things can and will get better. I promise you that. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to be reading to you two creepypastas. So, SpongeBob suicide, I haven't really seen too many creepypasta narrations on it. I think I remember seeing one 2013, if I remember right. Maybe 2014, by Dark Melody. I think that's the name of the narrator. I don't know any others by any other individuals, and I feel like it's a kind of an underrated lost episode creepypasta. Once we get to the critique section, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. But anyways, sit back and relax and enjoy these creepypastas from Nickelodeon, from your favorite childhood show, and these stories are about to wreck your childhood.
SpongeBob suicide. Does anyone remember the SpongeBob episode, The Sponge Who Could Fly, that aired in March 2004? It was dubbed the Lost Episode by its commercials based on the episode's storyline, where Apache the Pirate uses a treasure map to find the SpongeBob episode that he lost. The night before it was aired, I was sick with norovirus. I was vomiting almost every 5 minutes and was feeling too ill to fall asleep, so I stayed up and watched TV. Around 2:30 a.m. my stomach started to settle, so I planned to turn off the TV and try to fall asleep. But as I was reaching for the remote, the opening for the SpongeBob TV show started playing. SpongeBob was my favorite show at the time, so I couldn't miss out on watching it. Although I thought it was kind of strange that they were airing SpongeBob in the middle of the night, but I didn't think much of it. When the opening played, I noticed that the contrast of the animation was slightly darker than usual, and the theme song sounded a bit harsh and raspy. This made me feel a little uncomfortable, but I also tried brushing that off. The title card read, Lost Episode, so I figured that there was a mishap and Nickelodeon was accidentally airing The Sponge Who Could Fly. When the episode started playing, it immediately looked out of the ordinary. It started off with SpongeBob sitting on his bed, slouched down and looking down with a somber look on his face. This was definitely not like him. SpongeBob was so optimistic all the time. Why would he be acting like this? After about 10 seconds seeing SpongeBob like this, he let out a big sigh, then looked over to his bedside barrel, and a screen zoomed in onto a pill bottle that was sitting beside his clock. Once the screen zoomed in close enough to read the text on the bottle, it showed that it was a Prozac bottle. The show then panned to a scene with a much brighter contrast, showing SpongeBob taking one of the pills, then running off smiling and laughing. The fact that SpongeBob had to take pills to be, well, himself, made me feel uneasy, especially because mental disorders and antidepressants are more mature themes that obviously shouldn't be found in any place in any kid's show. It should be noted that this was seen on a show intended for kids. The scene then flipped back to the original scene of SpongeBob looking distressed, while at the same time changing the contrast back to the darker one. The scene froze on SpongeBob for a few seconds, then flickered on to a new scene. The scene then showed SpongeBob at his desk, the same one that was seen in the episode Procrastination, with his Prozac bottle, a piece of paper, and a pencil. In this scene, instead of staying at one contrast, the colors kept flickering from light to dark. SpongeBob gripped the pencil in his hand, and a tear rolled down his face. The part that bothered me the most was that the tear didn't look like the cartoon-style tears that the characters in SpongeBob usually cry out. The tear looked almost realistic, as if there had been a drop of water rolling down my TV from his eye. SpongeBob wiped a tear from his face with his sleeve, and began to write on a paper, reading out what he was writing. "I can't take it anymore," he said. As soon as he got that sentence out, a faint sound started playing in the background. It sounded like a child crying. The noise continued as SpongeBob continued writing. "My life hasn't gotten better. My life is horrible and hasn't gotten better. My best friend, Patrick, is only my best friend because he doesn't know any better. My neighbor, Squidward, hates my guts and would probably be happy if I wasn't around anymore." SpongeBob stopped writing and talking and started to weep loudly. The colors flickering started getting faster, and the cries in the background started getting louder, and it sounded like more children were beginning to cry. It could have been my imagination, but I remember hearing one of the children very faintly yell, "He's gonna do it! He's gonna do it! He's gonna do it!" The children's cries getting louder, and the colors kept flickering faster as SpongeBob keeps writing. The children's cries get louder, and the colors kept flickering faster as SpongeBob keeps writing. "The only job I can get is being the fry cook at the Krusty Krab. My boss, Mr. Krabs, refuses to give me an actual paycheck, and he's basically using me to get more customers. I'm in my 20s and I still don't have my driver's license. Sandy's the only girl I've ever had in my life, but even she's just a friend. She's never had any interest in me. Sandy's the only girl I've ever had in my life, and even she is just a friend. She's never had any interest in me. I'm pretty sure she's only my friend because she feels sorry for me. I'm sorry if I'm hurting anyone for doing this, but I just can't live like this anymore." The screen froze for a few seconds. Then the show continued with SpongeBob writing out his final sentence. The contrast stayed dark instead of flickering from light to dark, and the children stopped crying. It was absolute silence, except for SpongeBob saying, "Goodbye." The cries came back. SpongeBob quickly stood up, twisted off the lid of the Prozac bottle, dipped his head back, and let all the pills fill into his mouth and swallow them whole. The screen twitched, and the animation was darker but still visible. SpongeBob clenched on his stomach, vomited realistic, pale green-orange stomach bile. It was clear that his body was trying to cleanse itself from the overdose, but it was no use. SpongeBob collapsed onto the floor and lay motionless until the screen turned to static. Needless to say, I was scared out of my mind, and sleep was out of the question. Recently, I've been trying to look for this episode all over the internet, but not even one website seems to have it. If you recognize this episode, please let me know.
I just want to first start off by saying, if you want to answer in the end, prepare to be disappointed. There isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships are not. But it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the animators, I got to view episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They'd recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them a little longer to start up the new season. But the delay was longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room alongside the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be free of a Krabby Patty, and everyone gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of Rockabye Bivalve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny other than work-related chuckles, so when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music played as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside. Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when everything seemed off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound didn't. At this point, sound is synced up with animation. So yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There was some slight murmuring in the crowd before they began to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame, looking visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in the center of frame. He too is boring, very much unlike him. That wasn't the oddest thing though. What was odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed, very clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but it was something more than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children. Yet. The shot goes to Squidward, sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole is of a night sky, so it wasn't long after the concert. The unsettling part about this is that there was no sound. Literally no sound. Not even feedback from speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking in silence for about 30 seconds. He then started sobbing softly, put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes, and cried for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background started growing, from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through the wind. The screen begins to zoom in his face. By slowly, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen slightly twitches for a bit, as if it twists in on itself, and for a split second, back to normal. The wind through the tree sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if there was a storm brewing somewhere. The eerie part is that the sound and Squidward's sobbing sounded real. As if the sound wasn't coming through the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as sound the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals, never lasted for more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had some time to think about this. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently. Something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame, and what we saw was horrible. It was a still picture of a dead child. Could have been no more than 6. His face was mangled and bloody, one eye dangling from his face and popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, with his entrails laying on top of him. He was laying on some pavement that was beside a road. The upsetting part about this, there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags, no markers. The angle was completely off for being a shot designed to be evidence. It seemed like the photographer was responsible for the child's death. We were mortified, but pressed on, hoping that this was all just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind now sounded as if it were that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of tree branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twitched and showed a single photo. The editor was reluctant to go back, as were we, but he knew he had to. This time the photo was that of a little girl, no older than the first child. She was lying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was popped out too, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her. Above were a crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound. It was like when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyperrealism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if watching the viewer for about 10 seconds. He started to sob, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. And the most fear-inducing of all is his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep laughing. And this time, the still frame lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop on the 4th frame and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were being pulled out of his stomach by a large hand. The right eye was popped out and dangling, blood trickling down. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited all over the floor. The animating and sound editors gasped at the scene. The 5 frames were not as if there were 5 different pictures. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift the guts out, and we saw the kid's eye focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead animator told us to stop. He had called in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down, so the editor continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer at this point. Full frame of his face for about 3 seconds. Shot quickly panned out, and a deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately points the gun to his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splattered on the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what was left of his head above the floor. Staring blankly at it, the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg was obviously angry about this and demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most of the people in the room left at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, no one does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child was identified and no clues could be gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomenon before, but now that I have and cannot prove anything beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. And that was SpongeBob suicide and Squidward suicide. Let's first start off with SpongeBob suicide. Now, like I said in the beginning, I do believe that this is an underrated lost episode creepypasta. Before I read into it, I did read it a bit, and I don't know if I'm reading the right one, because I noticed that the ones I had were kind of trolls and basically said, like, for faint it said it's put fart, or having an alternate ending where SpongeBob didn't die and SpongeBob said don't do drugs, which I thought was in suitably bad taste. But regardless, I think that this story is interesting. Now, like I said, I don't buy it to be true. Absolutely not. I think it is possible, but I seriously doubt it. I would need to be given evidence beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, there are sometimes mishaps on television networks where they air something like in the middle of the night where, like, you know, might be kid friendly, or might accidentally air like a adult, like a more mature cartoon when a regular when like a kids' cartoon's supposed to be like, that stuff makes sense. And I did think it was very morbid, and personally, I feel really bad for SpongeBob and a lot of empathy for him, especially in the show, because to me, it just makes a lot of sense. It makes him very mature, I guess, in some way. I mean, not that SpongeBob's mature, but you understand, you feel sympathy for him, and if you watch the show, it kind of makes sense why he would feel the way he's feeling, especially when Squidward hates his guts. It does seem like that. I think it's a little bit stretched a bit for some of the stuff. But I think that this story is actually a fairly decent one. Now, Squidward's suicide. The legendary Squidward suicide. Oh boy. This one I really liked as a kid, but now looking at it, it just feels a little bit too much like a torture porn. Like, it's meant to be shocking for the sake of shocking, gratuitous violence. Like, obviously Squidward killing himself after a concert, I guess, makes sense? Sorta? And given that SpongeBob's made jokes about suicide, that kind of applies to SpongeBob's suicide. Like I said, this episode is not real. I remember, so here's a little bit of a rant. I know Draw My Life did 2 episodes on these two, and I don't know what they were doing. I thought they were kind of out of their goddamn mind. Like saying, like kind of switching for SpongeBob suicides, vodka. Like, vodka is a fine substitute, but saying that SpongeBob killed Squidward because he killed his snail just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think it just kind of cheapens everything. I guess it makes some sense, but it just feels kind of stupid and pathetic. And I know there's also some creepypastas or some retellings where they say, oh, there's a 4th kid that was murdered, or oh, they know the person who killed him. And I'm gonna actually, let me see here. And they claim that they know the person who did it, called Andrew Skinner, which I'm not even gonna lie. Looking at the wiki right now, it just looks like maybe a bad picture taken on Facebook. You know, it sounds very, very much of a stretch and sounds very stupid. Now, I might do the sequel to Squidward's suicide. I found 2 of them right now. But like I said, I just don't now, like I said, now let me explain why this isn't real for you. Now, the creative team being sapped with creativity is true, especially if you watch SpongeBob nowadays. Even after Steven Hillenburg died, they're basically scraping the bottom of the barrel. There's a lot of problems with that, besides the point. Steven Hillenburg did in fact leave, and Paul Tippett didn't take over. However, if you look at the trajectory of the seasons after the movie, it was made almost immediate. It was very close to right after the movie was released. Now, there could be a discrepancy that maybe they were animated during the movie, which makes sense to me, but I seriously doubt that, and I don't think that's possible. I mean, maybe they were set back a few months, like the team during the animation, but I seriously doubt that. Plus, the creator of the creepypasta, Squidward's suicide, did admit, I believe on a Reddit AMA, something like that he was inspired by Suicide Mouse and Dead Bart, and that's why he wrote the story. Now, I think that this is a fairly good addition to that premise, but I think SpongeBob's suicide to me is a little bit better, because to me at least, it makes more sense for SpongeBob to feel this way. I mean, Squidward too, but it's just the way that it's written, I think just makes more sense for SpongeBob. I mean, both of them are not very real, but who knows? Maybe they are. Maybe there's a lie to us. Maybe, let me tell you, I have a strong sneaking suspicion that SpongeBob's suicide was either written before or after Squidward's suicide. It was my theory is that it was written before by the same creator. When it didn't get popular, he modified it to be Squidward's suicide and added the dead kids. Now, I don't believe that they're real, but who knows, like I said. This has been Death Doom, signing off, and next week.